What's up, everybody? Michael Johnson here, and today we have a very special interview for you with somebody that has really influenced my life in a major way. I got to meet him when I was 12 years old, and not only for me, but for a lot of people, he's changed their lives forever. And of course, that's the kind of person we like to interview on this podcast. So, without further ado, we'll cue the theme song and we'll get into the interview.
Hi, my name is Michael Johnson, and I'm part of a motivated group of people who are dedicated to attaining emotional mastery and unlocking our full potential. We don't believe others are responsible for how we feel. In fact, we don't believe anyone can make us feel anything. Emotional mastery is our journey, and unlocking our true potential is the key. We are Magic for Life, and this is your weekly Magic.
What's up, lifers? Michael Johnson and the Magic for Life podcast here today. We've got a very special interview, as we said in the intro, with Ron Montez. So thank you so much for joining us today, Ron, and we appreciate you being here and joining us on our podcast. And thanks for coming.
You're welcome. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
We wanted to interview you about a bunch of things, but one of the things that I think happens, especially in the ballroom world, is people get attached to maybe that one title or that one thing that you did, and oftentimes they don't know about the other things that you've accomplished. So I kind of wanted to ask/force you to tell us some of your other accolades. Obviously, when you're introduced, most often they introduce you as the 7-time U.S. Latin champion, but you've accomplished so many things and you've achieved so many things. So I understand that it's kind of like you don't want to toot your own horn, but at the same time, I think a lot of people don't know about the other things that you've done and accomplished. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the other accolades that maybe are less commonly talked about that you achieved along the way?
Sure. Thank you. Well, first of all, most people don't know that I really started. My first competition was a ballroom competition, and it was the California Star Ball, and it was with a lady by the name of Pam Dorney, and we made the final. I think we were fourth. And at that time, I was attending Brigham Young University, and I was a pro at that time, and could not do some of the amateur activities that they had there. But I could teach, which I did, and then I competed in ballroom first, and Latin came around secondary. So my first partner, Ron Montez, we did 10 dance. And so we spent our time practicing between two styles. It might seem strange, but really I preferred practicing ballroom over Latin. I love the ballroom music, particularly foxtrot. Some of those tunes are endearing to me, and just the swing and the smoothness and just the character of the foxtrot, I really did enjoy. And also warming up with that dance form is a lot easier than in the Latin. In Latin, you have to put a lot of energy into every dance. And so maybe suiting my personality a little bit more were the ballroom dances at that point. Of course, I love Latin. I always have. When I was a new teacher, we went to Latin clubs and we danced Latin all the time. So. But that was the social Latin, not the competitive Latin, and it was a different era. Competition wasn't a major thing. It wasn't so prevalent in our society like it is now. But dancing socially was. We sought out places that had good music. We danced with partners, but not necessarily connected with one partner solely. We would dance with one routine with another, and one routine with another, and one routine with another. So we had a variety of partners. In those days, if you were a good dancer, you were thought of as a good dancer as a soloist, and therefore you could come into a school and maybe do some work, some choreography, and dance with any of the staff members. So the lead and follow aspect of dancing was a big deal, not so much routine oriented. Other than that, I think I've been very fortunate in my career. I've had good partners. With Elizabeth Curtis, we participated in that program, Star Search, with Ed McMahon, who was the host, and I think we reached the final or something. I don't really remember, but it was a lot of fun, high energy. Some good contestants in the various styles. There was spokesperson, there were male vocalists, female vocalists, etc.
It's kind of like the America's Got Talent that's on today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, it was a predecessor to all these kind of more recent programs.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was fun. It was a great experience, and I enjoyed it a lot. Later on, my television experience included choreographing for So You Think You Can Dance, which was also very, very interesting and very educational, because we dealt with dancers who were very skilled but not in the ballroom dances.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that you had to be careful at what you introduced to them as choreography. You had limited time, but what you chose for them to do was based on what they could accomplish and look good doing.
Sure.
The ballroom dances, that was not so easy. The land dances, maybe more so.
Right.
So, yes.
Well, I know you also competed at the prestigious Blackpool Championships, and you did pretty well there as well, even at Worlds, right?
Yes, I went to Blackpool many, many, many times, more than I can count. Went to England for training, and then always attended Blackpool and stayed after for a while. But those were great years. I look back with fondness on those years. They were growing years. They were years of gaining experience purely of dancing.
Sure.
But yes, went to Blackpool and competed in the Rising Star. One year was sixth. The following year, second in the Rising Star. And in that particular year, we made the semifinal of the Open Latin. So therefore, we couldn't dance the Rising Star anymore. So following that, we went to the Open Latin with my partner at that time, Elizabeth Curtis. And then we were fortunate enough to make the final in the British Championships.
Sure. Now, that's pretty. It's a pretty big accomplishment, considering very few Americans, especially at that time, had maybe bridged that gap. And so you were certainly one of the first that had done that, as I understand. Is that correct?
Well, yes. I followed in the footsteps of three remarkable American dance couples. Sam Sedano and his partners, Bobby Medeiros and his partners, and the famous Vernon Brock.
Sure.
Those three, they made an impact in Europe, and I was kind of following in their footsteps, but was successful, so I'm surely happy about that.
Yeah. Well, I want to kind of dig into, this podcast is a lot about peak performance. We talk about being able to perform really at your best and find ways to improve ourselves, not just physically, but mentally, and trying to improve the methods in which we go about our craft. We have a lot of dancers that listen to this, but we also have a lot of athletes. And as they go through and work on what they do, we like to get champions of their craft to come in and talk about how they did it and how they went about doing their craft. And so one of the things that I wanted to bring up and ask you about was really about how you went about practicing. You and let's take you and Liz. I know you had a lot of partners, but why don't we chat about you and Liz and how you guys went through your typical practice? And would you suggest that the kids maybe practice that way today, or would you tell them to do it different than how you went about?
That's a very interesting question. I think dancers today practice in a more scientific manner. We were isolated in those days. We didn't really have the access to social media and the video and YouTube and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So we couldn't, let's say, for example, steal choreography by watching YouTube and say, let's do that, or our interpretation of that. So we had to come up with pretty much our own stuff.
Sure.
We did take training and coaching, of course, but it was more seldom for sure.
Sure.
It was not as often as couples, I think, train nowadays. And we were left to our own devices.
Sure.
So I think because that's true, the couples then were more individual in nature, in their dances, their character, their interpretation were more individual.
Yeah.
So nowadays we have kind of a sameness throughout the field, and that's obvious when you watch a competition nowadays.
Sure.
They all look somewhat similar, but I think in those days it wasn't that way. It
Sure.
was couples looked like they had their own thing going, their own flavor.
Right. Well, a lot of our listeners aren't ballroom dancers per se, although if you are not a ballroom dancer out there and you'd like to see a competition or something along those lines, you should definitely look into it. They're easy to find. There's almost a competition in every state, so you should check it out. They're a lot of fun to attend, and it's a great evening of fun. So if you're not a ballroom dancer, you should check it out. But for our dancers out there, you had mentioned taking choreography from YouTube. One of the things that I've noticed through the progression of dance as YouTube and the internet has become readily available to our smartphones. I mean, you can get on the internet immediately, is that we're seeing, I've had it described by a lot of coaches, we're seeing sort of a cheap copy of what maybe is the guts and roots of the technical skill. And I think that maybe it's coming from YouTube and the fact that they can look at it, they can copy it, but maybe they didn't learn necessarily how to do it from the inside out. What do you think? Do you think that that's the case, or do you think that it's just because they're trying to be the same as each other and that's kind of creating that copycat kind of a look? What is it that you think is going on there?
Yes, I think the uniformity is definitely there. We see it when we watch a competition. I mean, there are certain couples that do their best to be different, to carve their own path.
Sure.
And I think so, the champion couples definitely do that.
Right.
For instance, reflecting on the past, there was a world and British champion, Donnie Burns, who sought out training and sought out to learn about dancing from a different perspective.
Right.
He came to America, he studied West Coast swing, he wanted to know about mambo and the other Latin dances. So basically he set himself head and shoulders above his fellow competitors by his willingness to learn and train and have an open mind towards other dance styles.
Sure.
So it did him a lot of good. Now, I think our couples nowadays can do the same. I mean, there are different styles of dance, and they can be beneficial in your process of becoming a better couple. There's the West Coast swing world.
Right.
There's boogie woogie.
Right.
There's the Cuban style. There's the earthy American rhythm style. So looking into it, studying it, only can broaden your horizons and make you a more aware dancer and have more to choose from.
Sure. How do you suggest the couples that are dancing and trying to find their way through the ranks, how do they define themselves and be unique without necessarily losing their opportunity to get marked? Because as I watch, I feel like if you don't look a certain way, it almost makes you stand out in a bad way. And so it's kind of a challenging thing to teach, because how do they stand out and look unique if that same very thing will keep them from getting marked? So how does that work?
Well, I think couples determine their own style. They determine what they want to represent and the stories they want to tell.
Sure.
Recently, I've seen some positive signs. I've seen couples that in jive incorporate a lot of swing, but of course to a faster pace.
Sure.
They don't necessarily throughout their jive have a high knee action. They use more their feet and ankles and do clever footwork and strong rhythmic action in their feet. I think that's a positive thing.
Okay.
Jive does not have to be all high knees and hops and flicks. It can, of course, part of that has to be in there, I think, to satisfy the people who think that is jive.
Sure.
But there are ways of departing from that and making it look a little different.
Right.
The main thing is that couples have to work on is telling the story of each dance completely and thoroughly,
Sure.
and convincingly. And what happens is couples get so involved in creating speed and being powerful,
Sure.
and other performance aspects, and they depart from the story that should be told. There always should be an image in the spectator's mind, and the educated spectator's mind at least, that there's something being portrayed here that relates to that dance. Paso doble, rumba, samba, cha-cha, etc. And I think sometimes when I work with couples, I say, this section is good. It's telling me the right information about, let's say, Paso doble, but this other section is just a bunch of movements.
Right.
It doesn't really convey any Paso doble feeling or story to me.
Right.
So if a couple has at the top of their priority list to convey the story of each dance, does this move, does this combination, does this line have something to do with the dance?
Sure. Well, it seems as though that the not that there's a limit on our technical ability, but at the same time, we know there's a physical limit for, say, Olympic sprinters. There's only so much that they can get faster, and the body can only handle doing so much. There's a great TED Talk about how the human body hasn't changed hugely. I mean, there was an advancement of understanding of how the muscles and everything need to develop, and the body type that needs to be created to be a sprinter. But what they showed was that technology actually played a huge part in it. They changed the shoes. They changed the way the track was. It was no longer on dirt, and it went to, a special kind of material that they laid for the track. They changed the outfits that they were wearing from maybe sweats to shorts to, spandex, lycra type material that was a little bit more aerodynamic. So there was all this technology behind it that improved the actual ability to sprint. I think it seems like in dance at this stage in the game, we've evolved a lot in the last, for sure, maybe 25, 30 years, because you can see it in the form and in the technical skill. Like, we're getting a little bit wiser about not doing things that are going to break us later. A lot of the older generation is starting to realize, hey, I did hip action like this for so many years and I had to have hip surgery. Or, hey, I had to, I did these straight legs, and you were talking about it recently in one of your classes, and I did it so hard that I had to have knee replacements. And maybe there's something bad going to that, so maybe I shouldn't pass that on to the next generation. So I think we're kind of in that phase right now where a lot of the older generation is starting to hopefully realize that we don't want to hurt our dancers, and maybe long term there are some better ways and better approaches to execute that technique in that form. But that being said, all of that technology I think is coming to play. So I feel like that's kind of the era we're in. But there was a time period when a lot of foreigners were coming to the United States, and dancing changed massively, and there was this robotic kind of phase that we kind of went through, especially in Latin, which made everybody look very much the same. If you didn't look like that, you were out. You were kind of you were kind of looked at as, oh, well, you don't fit in with all of those really great dancers that moved here from overseas. It seems to me now, as listening to judges' interviews and where they're talking about, and just as you said, the story is in many cases missing, and the emotional content or the meaning behind it is missing. I spend a lot of time talking about emotional mastery and talking about story. And how do you go about getting that emotional content or that story into their craft, into their dances? What is it that you do to help them get into that place?
I think dancers, to be able to improve in that particular area we're talking about, telling the story of the dance, being authentic and stuff, have to search. They have to search outside of their own little world. In other words, what is the Paso Doble? what is the role of the matador? Why does a matador stand a certain way? Those type things. Have to look. One of the books I read when I was studying possibility was Death in the Afternoon by Ernest Hemingway, and in the book was a bunch of pictures of bullfighters,
Sure.
and how they stood and how they what the dangers they faced and all that stuff, and so that helped me to a certain degree.
Right.
Reaching out to, as I mentioned, other forms to see how they interpret similar music that you're dancing to. I recently recommended to a couple that they look at the video, it's very available on YouTube, of Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor dancing to a song. Tap dance.
Right.
Now, they were tap dancers, but a lot of what they did with their feet, legs, ankles, etc., and rhythms can be adapted to jive.
Sure.
Borrowed or transferred over to fit the jive. But someone who's clever and someone who's interested in being more of a pioneer can look at tap, for instance, and get a lot out of it.
Right.
So that's always a possibility to search into other dance forms for information. I just read I just saw a documentary on a famous ballet dancer from the New York City Ballet. Her last name was Whelan, Whelan, and her rigors and her dance forms, and looking at dance performances of other dance forms is very, very educational.
Sure.
You gain a lot of information. One of the examples I use a lot is hula. I go to Hawaii a lot because I love it there, and I love the music and the style. Now, hula tells a story. Every hand movement, every gesture means something, and it's fluid, it's smooth, it has continuous action, it has beauty, it has softness, and the posture is wonderful with shoulders flat. They don't spot when they turn, which is kind of interesting and nice. And they're dancing on the balls of the feet, so it requires strong legs and ankles. And I appreciate it so much because some of the things that are not good about our dancing, the abruptness, the stiffness sometimes, the trying to hit lines so hard that it's actually offensive sometimes.
Right.
So the fluidity, the softness, and the continuous type actions are missing. So when I look at other forms like hula, I'm very appreciative. I know we can't be dancing hula in our form,
Of course,
but we can learn something by observing it.
Yeah, sure. When like I said, we have other people that listen to the podcast that aren't dancers, so I'm going to kind of move away from the dance side of things just a little bit and talk about emotional mastery, which is kind of the segue here of talking about story within dance. When you hear the words emotional mastery, what is it that means to you? Like, what do you think of when you're thinking of emotional mastery?
I think, first of all, it has to be genuine. It has to be authentic. In other words, it has to come from within.
Sure.
You can't produce something in a way that's fake and really convey it honestly.
Right.
And that's easy to spot.
Right.
I mean, if a couple really feels what they're doing, they enjoy dancing, they have a love for it, and they have a appreciation of their partner and the ability to dance, the environment they're dancing in, the music they're dancing to. If they have all those things and they let it come out from within, and it's able to, for instance, when you see an old friend, you go up to that old friend, you're happy to see them, you embrace them, fine. And you may see them again in 3 months. The same thing happens. You're happy to see them. So these feelings can be reproduced.
Sure.
In other words, when you hear rumba, you think of what rumba means, and you try to reproduce rumba, what it means to you.
Right.
The love, the sensuality, the connection with your partner, the love story.
Right.
So that has to be reproduced honestly. Sometimes you're better at it than others. That's true.
Yeah.
And sometimes in practice, you just go through the motions to perfect those actions. But when you perform, your mind has to flip over to being authentic.
Right. It seems to me that in other forms of of art, music, painting, photography, singing. It certainly comes across the same way. We were looking at some paintings, and you can kind of tell when there's an artist that has a love behind their piece of work, because those pieces of art stop you in your tracks. I was once in Russia, and we were at the Hermitage Museum, and they told us that if you stopped and looked at every piece of art in that museum for 1 minute, you'd be there for 11 years. They told us this right before we went into the museum and said, "You have 2 hours. We'll see you in the bus." And so we started flying through, but not knowing much about art, and it's certainly not one of my proficiencies. But it seems to me that in those moments, as we were running through the Hermitage, there were paintings that would just stop you in your tracks. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not a painter. I'm not an artist of that type, but there's something about it that called out to you. And I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about is there's a realness, there's an authenticness to the emotional output, because it's a real feeling. It's really coming from them, and they're experiencing it while they're producing that piece of art. And that Hermitage experience was amazing, because some of the pieces that I saw really kind of brought a new appreciation for me of art in general, outside of dance, because up to that point everything was all dance. That's all I could see. But I think you can hear it in singing too. I was watching The Voice recently, that TV show, and I was asked why I liked one person over the other, because they were both excellent singers. And I think what it really came down to was the authenticity of one of them compared to the other. One of them was really super technically trained, and they had all the right things, and they were doing all the right things. And even the judges in the show said that. They said that they had the technical skill, and they said they had all of the training. But the other one had soul. They had guts, and there was depth to what they were singing. And it maybe wasn't perfect all the time, but it was powerful. What, for you, in terms of attaining that storyline, did you consciously try to do any of that while you were dancing and competing, or was it just purely because you loved what you were doing? Like, what did you stop and think about any of that stuff, or was it just how things were?
There's two sides of the coin from my perspective. The technician, the person who trains their body to such a high level that it can do amazing things. Okay. Then there's the raw talent, the one that is not trained but has soul, has feeling, and impresses you with that aspect of their movement.
Right.
So the technician admires the free form, go for it, lack of technique dancer who's brilliant in their own genre or in their own area.
Right.
And then that dancer looks at the very highly trained dancer and has an admiration for them too.
Sure.
So there's a cross admiration that takes place. Now, the best dancers, we feel, are the ones that can do both, that can borrow from the street dancer, from the Cuban, from the more earthy type of performance, to the highly technical, correct, point your toes, stretch your body, etc. The combination of those two create a fine dancer who has everything.
Sure.
And once in a while, someone can do it.
Yeah.
You see a lot of technically trained dancers who don't have feeling,
Right.
and then you see some of the other ones who are wild,
Right.
and they don't have the technical that we also want to see.
If you live on one side or the other, as some of these peak performers out there do, I mean, because I think that applies whether you're playing basketball or whether you're painting a picture or whether you're dancing, I think the same thing seems to apply. There are some people that are just really great at the technical aspect and some on the feeling aspect. But do you think that the opposite side can be learned?
Yeah, I think it can be. I mean, it's let's say for sure it's not easy.
Right.
Maybe the one person from one side does not want to cross over to the other side.
Right.
They're happy with what they're doing, and they're content to continue as they have been
Sure. Sure.
forever.
Yeah.
The other type person wants to borrow or attain additional training or expertise in that style. For instance, I went to Cuba last year before last in February for an event there, a dance event, and we studied Cuban dance and culture.
Sure.
Okay, so our teachers were Cubans. Okay, and we watched them dance. Were they thinking of stretching their ankle, pointing their toe,
Right.
flat shoulder line, head held erect? I don't think that was what they were worried about. They wanted to express the music.
Right.
Their center body was very active.
Right.
They had a lot of action in their body. But to watch them dance was sheer joy.
Right.
You admired what they did. Along with them, we had the Europeans who came to train,
Sure.
and they danced side by side in one exercise that we had. And they both were good.
Right.
They both were good. And then they even changed partners, the trained European competitor with the Cuban.
Sure.
And that was very interesting because, the Cuban, let's say the Cuban girl had to follow the European guy. And if the European guy was a good leader, the Cuban girl went right along. If he'd been just indoctrinated in learning a routine, it wouldn't have worked.
Right. Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. So a lot of times our competitive dancers are not good social dancers in the respect of lead and follow or ad lib, or as in swing world, Jack and Jill when partners switch off.
Sure.
And sometimes in a swing competition, they have their performances or their competitions, and all of a sudden they change partners. And to me,
Yeah.
that is probably the best thing of the whole event because they're dancing with someone else who's not their partner,
Right.
and they're working with one another to a greater extent. There's no routine to follow.
Sure.
So I think there's something to be said, and I think competitive dancers shy away from dancing freeform,
Right. Yeah.
and I don't think that's good.
Not
I
as
mean,
much.
I've danced with some competitive dancers, ladies, because a social dance
Sure.
at a party or an after party, and some of them are excellent.
Right.
They're right with me and feed off me. Other times they're not good at all, and
Right.
it is shocking to me how they can be to the level they are without no awareness of interaction with lead and follow
Right.
in the category.
Right.
I participated in an event in a competition in the East Coast where they picked three male dancers. I was one of them. Retired.
Sure.
And then they teamed us up with amateur girls.
Okay.
And these girls were of the international style. But the dances we were chosen to dance were American rhythm dances. American rumba, whatever.
Sure.
And we didn't know who we were going to get. And we didn't know we'd pick dances out of a hat.
Oh, I see.
So now, I danced with one girl in particular who's an excellent dancer, who was with me like she was reading my mind. We danced to that mambo song, Ran Can Can by Tito Puente.
Yeah, sure.
And it has hits and stops in it.
Yeah.
I would stop, she would stop. We would be kind of speaking the same language. It was
Sure.
amazing to dance with this girl.
Right.
One of the other girls, no success whatsoever. Nothing worked. And the other guys also felt the same thing.
Sure.
So some people have this ability to interact with a partner
Right.
that is innate or practiced
Sure.
from a background of social dance or lead and follow dance.
It seems as though the ballroom world at the moment needs to kind of evolve to that space where we get rid of the routiners that are just going through the routine that they've practiced 10,000 times, and it's sort of just a shell of what dancing can be. And I understand that that's certainly a valuable element of the picture, but it seems as though that authenticness and being able to really dig in is probably where we've got to head next. Do you agree? Or
Yes, I think so. I think there has to be exercises in lead and follow.
Sure.
Of practicing basics, of course.
Yeah.
In not thinking of producing power and speed, but producing a harmony between the man and the woman.
Sure.
And then adding on the punch, so to speak. I think nowadays in competitive dance we see, let's show off how fast we can go, and then let's stop. And then let's go see how fast we can go, and then let's stop.
Right.
And it's really boring because you can see that that's their theme.
Right.
Spin the girl as fast as you can, have her stop, wiggle a little bit, resume. So
Yeah.
that theme it has some merit
Right.
as far as like a performance is concerned. But for someone like me who sees dancing all the time,
Right.
it's totally predictable.
Want more magic for life? If so, then reserve your copy of my new book. Get your copy at everyminutebook.com. Inside this book, you'll find the secrets to attaining the next level of performance in anything you do. Learn the secrets behind emotional mastery that'll start you on your new journey of being a lifer. Whether you're an athlete, a business professional, or an artist, this book will change your life forever. Get your copy reserved today.